Security has been without a Senate-confirmed commissioner since the most recent term expired January 19, 2013. That's more than 5 years. This is the largest single period of vacancy for the head of a department or major federal agency since the Social Security became independent, and that's not right. Not only has Social Security been led by acting commissioners, but for over 3 years, we haven't even had a nominee for the Senate to consider. The President needs to nominate a commissioner without further delay, and once he does, the Senate should move quickly because the American people have waited too long. Yesterday, GAO announced the Social Security Administration is in violation of the Vacancy Reform Act. Without objection, the opinion will be made a part of the record. This is a big deal and a reminder that Social Security needs a nominee now. That's already, acting commissioners can keep an agency on a course that's already set, but they don't have the same authority to lead as a Senate-confirmed commissioner. You'll hear today an acting commissioner just isn't empowered to make strategic decisions regarding the long-term operation of the agency. Social Security Administration needs the strong and consistent leadership of a Senate-confirmed commissioner to keep the agency focused on providing the service Americans expect, need, and deserve. We are now more than 5 years into a 6-year term. The American people can't afford to wait any longer. Mr. President, we need you to nominate a commissioner now. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. And now I'll recognize Mr. Larson for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses as well for joining us here today. And I want to associate myself with the remarks of our chairman. This is a travesty that this position with so vital an agency hasn't been filled. And as I think everyone will remember, and I want to commend the President, I recall vividly when he stood among 16 other candidates for office in his own party and spoke forthrightly about the need to not only preserve but to expand Social Security. So we know where his heart and his sentiment lies, but what we need, I think, as the chairman has underscored, is the need for us to take action and the need for us to put a commissioner in that position. I think what makes the sense of urgency for this, I think, as everyone in the audience knows, and certainly the people on this committee, that 10,000 baby boomers a day, let me repeat that, 10,000 fellow Americans a day become Social Security eligible. So with 10,000 becoming eligible a day, it is paramount that we put somebody in charge at the head of an agency where we've seen a 15% increase almost of the number of people who are in need of Social Security and prevailing upon it, while it has been cut 11%. We need to address that as well, and this committee is the appropriate place to do that. Both Mr. Johnson and myself have bills to address this. It's my hope that we'll be able to have a hearing on those bills and be able to address the underlying concerns that so many Americans who depend upon Social Security, and for way too many, the only source of retirement that they have. And so this is a vital lifeline to the American citizens. This is why it's paramount. I commend the chairman for calling this meeting, and I further commend him for his call of urgency to make sure that we install and confirm, nominate and confirm. Now, I have several suggestions as well for the President, including amongst them Max Richmond, who you're going to hear from today who heads up the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, or Nancy Altman, or Judith Stein, or Bill Archer, the former fellow Texan who is still quite active himself, Earl Pomeroy, the former insurance commissioner from South Dakota, John Tanner, or my predecessor, Barbara Connelly. I want to commend Nancy Berryhill for her work that she's been doing in an acting capacity. But truly, as the chairman has indicated and underscored, we need to make sure that we both nominate and confirm and put somebody at the head of this vital agency for all of America. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back and anticipate and be glad to participate in the questioning and listening to what our witnesses have to say.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate your statement. And as is customary, any member is welcome to submit a statement for the hearing record. And before we move on to our testimony, I want to remind our witnesses to please limit your statements to 5 minutes. However, without objection, all of the written testimony will be made a part of the hearing record. We have 4 witnesses today. Seated at the table are Elizabeth Curda, Director of Education, Workforce, and Income Security, Government Accountability Office; Valerie Brannon, Legislative Attorney, American Law Division, Congressional Research Service; Max Richmond, President and CEO, National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare; and Max Steer, President and CEO, Partnership for Public Service. Ms. Curda, welcome. Thanks for being here. Please proceed.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to be here to discuss the significant demographic, technological, and management challenges facing the Social Security Administration's leadership as they seek to deliver timely and accurate services to Americans. In fiscal year 2017, SSA paid out nearly $1 trillion in retirement and disability benefits to 67 million beneficiaries, and an average of 420,000 people call or visit one of its 1,200 field offices every day. However, with the baby boom generation entering their disability-prone and retirement-eligible years, workloads will continue to increase, just as SSA faces a depletion of institutional knowledge and leadership from waves of retiring employees. SSA also faces rapidly changing demands from Americans increasingly seeking virtual access to services while it continues to rely on antiquated systems to process claims. GAO has issued numerous reports on these challenges with recommendations to address them and to place SSA's disability programs on GAO's high-risk list. A common theme that cuts across our work is the need to modernize how SSA does business, which SSA has acknowledged. While SSA has agreed with and taken action on many of our recommendations, many also remain unimplemented, including some we have suggested are a high priority for top leadership attention. The challenges I will discuss today fall into 3 areas. First, managing disability workloads and program integrity. Second, modernizing physical infrastructure and service delivery. And third, modernizing information technology. With regard to managing disability workloads and program integrity, while SSA significantly reduced the number of pending initial claims over the past 7 years, pending appealed claims rose from 770,000 to 1.1 million over the same period, and these claims now take an average of 605 days to process. Although SSA has a plan and initiatives underway to reduce its appeals backlog, we reported that some of SSA's appeals initiatives are either contingent on additional funding, such as hiring, or have met with limited success when tried in the past. Our work has also shown that SSA faces challenges ensuring the integrity of its disability programs. For example, one case of fraud reported by the SSA's Inspector General involved 70 individuals and $14 million in fraudulent benefits. In 2017, SSA established an office responsible for coordinating anti-fraud programs across the agency and gathered information on some fraud risks. However, we found that SSA had not fully assessed its fraud risks, had not developed an overall anti-fraud strategy, and did not have a complete set of metrics to determine whether its anti-fraud efforts have been effective. SSA has agreed to our recommendations and begun to take action on some of them. Turning to modernizing service delivery and infrastructure, advances in technology have the potential to greatly improve SSA service delivery while reducing its reliance on costly office space. For example, individuals can now apply for some disability benefits online rather than in person. However, we found that SSA did not have readily available data on problems customers had with online applications or why. In addition, the agency had not established performance goals to determine whether these new service delivery options, such as off-site kiosks, are succeeding. We also found that SSA has not developed a long-term plan for right-sizing its office space to reflect these types of changes in service delivery. We recommended that SSA improve its building space plans and do more to monitor and assess online and remote service delivery, and SSA agreed to take action. Finally, regarding the modernization of SSA's information technology, SSA's legacy information technology systems are increasingly difficult and expensive to maintain. We identified SSA's spending on the operations and maintenance of its IT infrastructure as among the 10 largest IT expenditures at federal agencies as of fiscal year 2015. We recommended that the agency identify and plan to modernize or replace legacy systems in accordance with OMB guidance. SSA agreed and reported that it is finalizing an information technology modernization plan. In summary, the actions SSA's executive leadership will need to take to modernize the management of its disability programs, its physical infrastructure, its online service delivery, and information technology assets will require vision and sustained long-term attention. This concludes my prepared statement, and I'm happy to answer the committee's questions.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony. Ms. Brannon, welcome. Thanks for being here. Please proceed.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the subcommittee, my name is Valerie Brannon. I am a legislative attorney in the American Law Division of the Congressional Research Service. Thank you for inviting me to testify today on behalf of CRS. I will be addressing the statutes that may authorize someone to serve as acting commissioner of Social Security in the event of a vacancy in the office. There are two statutes that may authorize a governmental official to serve as acting commissioner. The first is the Federal Vacancies Reform Act of 1998, or the Vacancies Act, which generally governs acting officers serving in vacant advice and consent positions in the executive branch. The second statute is Section 702 of the Social Security Act, which contains a provision pertaining specifically to a vacancy in the office of the commissioner. The first statute, the Vacancies Act, generally governs vacancies in executive branch positions that require appointment through the advice and consent of the Senate. It usually provides the exclusive means for temporarily authorizing an acting official to perform the functions and duties of any such position. The Vacancies Act places two kinds of limitations on acting service. First, the statute only allows certain classes of employees to perform the duties of a vacant position. And second, it specifies that such employees may perform these duties for only a limited period of time. The Vacancies Act allows three classes of officials to serve as acting officers. First, as a default rule, once the office becomes vacant, the first assistant to that office automatically becomes the acting officer. Alternatively, the president may direct two other classes to serve as an acting officer instead of that first assistant. Either a person who's currently serving in a different advice and consent position or certain senior employees working in the same agency. The Vacancies Act also limits the amount of time that a vacant advice and consent position may be filled by an acting officer. There are two independent time limits. The first is a fixed term of days that runs from the date that the vacancy arose, and the second allows an acting officer to serve while a nomination to the position is pending in the Senate. The second statute that may govern a vacancy in the Commissioner's office is Section 702 of the Social Security Act, which creates the positions of the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner. Section 702 states that in the event of a vacancy in the office of the Commissioner, the Deputy Commissioner shall be acting Commissioner, unless the President designates another officer of the government as acting Commissioner. Section 702 does not explain who these other officers that may be by the President are, and it also doesn't contain any express time limitations on acting service. As mentioned, the Vacancies Act usually provides the only way for an employee to temporarily perform the functions and duties of the vacant office. However, on its own terms, it's only exclusive unless another statute expressly designates someone to serve as an acting officer. Section 702 does designate another government official, the deputy commissioner, to temporarily perform the commissioner's duties as acting commissioner. But just because the Vacancies Act does not apply exclusively to the position of the commissioner, that does not necessarily mean that it does not apply at all. It's possible that both the Vacancies Act and Section 702 could apply to a vacancy in the commissioner's office. If the two statutes are consistent, then this doesn't present any problems. But if there are inconsistencies between those two statutes, this could lead to challenges to an acting officer's authority. Imagine that one statute authorizes acting service, but the other prohibits it. An acting commissioner might take an action under the more permissive statute, but someone could argue that the limitations of the other statute prohibited that action. If such an action was challenged in court, the judge would have to figure out not only whether this first, possibly more permissive statute actually did permit the action, but also would have to figure out which of the two conflicting statutes should prevail. With respect to the Commissioner's Office, such a conflict is possible. The Vacancies Act creates a detailed scheme setting out who may serve and how long they may serve. On the other hand, Section 702 is silent on a few issues and could possibly be read as more permissive. However, it is also possible to read these two statutes as consistent. There's very little case law interpreting these two statutes, so ultimately it's hard to reach any definite conclusions on this issue. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. What's the one thing you want us to get out of that comment?
There are some complicated statutes that govern this vacancy.
And you follow the statutes?
I do.
Thank you very much. Who's next?
Max Richmond.
Mr. Richmond, welcome. Thanks for being here. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the subcommittee. On behalf of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, I want to thank you for inviting me to testify at this morning's hearing regarding the challenges faced by Social Security after being led for over 5 years, by a series of acting commissioners. Before I present my statement, I just wanted to say on behalf of the millions of members and supporters of the National Committee, I'd like to express my thanks to you, Chairman Johnson, for your many years of leadership on matters involving Social Security, and of course, for your distinguished service to our country for many years prior to that. Turning to the subject of today's hearing, I believe that extended periods without a confirmed commissioner is obviously not desirable. When Congress decided to make the Social Security Administration an independent agency back in 1994, one of the goals of the legislation was to provide the agency with continuity of leadership. In fact, I'm told the Senate-passed version of the bill required the President to nominate a new commissioner within 60 days of enactment. While desirable, we do not believe that the problems confronting Social Security can be fixed simply by nominating and confirming a new commissioner. Congress must also provide the new commissioner with the resources he or she will need to do the job, and that means adequate funding for this important agency. Unfortunately, what we've seen in recent years is a steady decline in funding for the agency. At exactly the same time, the workload has soared. Mr. Larson mentioned 10,000 people being added to the rolls every day. It's about 1 million additional people added every year for the last few years. This is not a time to be reducing funding. In fact, the Social Security Administration's budget has been cut by a total of about 11%, adjusted for inflation. These cuts have forced the closing of field offices, shortening of office hours, reductions in overtime, shrinking of staff. And automation has helped some, but not enough to prevent a deterioration in levels of service. So it's not surprising that the quality and timeliness of the service has declined. Getting an appointment to file a claim can take weeks, in some offices, and those who visit an office without an appointment have to wait hours in many cases. Service on the 800 number line has declined as well. Currently, it takes about 20 minutes to reach a service representative. In 2010, it took about three minutes. Many seniors simply hang up, give up, and hang up. In fact, we call the 800 number. When you gavel the hearing to order, we're still on hold. We're told we'll be about an hour. So I wanted to also make a comment about how disturbing it is when you look at the disability hearing situation. Over the past few years, a historically high backlog has grown. There are over 1 million cases waiting to be heard. Right now, it takes about 600 days on average for a decision to be made. The human hardship caused by these delays is enormous. People are losing their homes, delaying health care, declaring bankruptcy, and they're dying. About 10,000 people die each year while waiting for a decision. If this hearing goes for about 2 hours, 2 people will die during the course of the hearing, waiting for an appeals decision. Social Security's administrative funding has been neglected for far too long. I believe it's time for members of Congress to adequately fund Social Security so it can provide the vital services that American seniors expect and deserve. During the debate on the 2018 omnibus appropriations, the National Committee urges members to provide the agency with $560 million additional dollars over this year's appropriated level of $12.4 million. This will increase and help restore some of the cuts that were made since 2010 and cover, or begin to cover, inflation. We believe similar increases should be in the 2019 appropriations bill. To conclude, Mr. Chairman, we agree completely that having a confirmed commissioner is important, but it's also important that the agency has adequate funding. These two must be united if the Social Security Administration is able to meet its obligations to the American people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Steer, welcome and thanks for being here. Please proceed.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Larson, members of the committee. My name is Max Steyer. I'm the president and CEO of the Partnership for Public Service. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make the federal government more effective. This hearing is a terrific hearing to focus on a critical issue. We have a broken system. No other democracy on this planet has a new administration walking in with a requirement of putting in 4,000 political appointees, 1,200 of them requiring Senate confirmation. So this is an issue that actually extends beyond Social Security, but clearly is a big issue here as well, and your hearing is critical to make sure that the spotlight is placed on it. The problem is a big one. No administration has staffed quickly. This administration is well behind prior administrations. We track the top 630 some odd appointments of those 1,200 that require Senate confirmation. Of those, only 274 are actually filled. And you're looking at 218 where there is no nominee. That's a big problem. There's big chunks of government where critical leader is simply not in place. Mr. Chairman, you made a great point in your opening comments. It matters to have a temporary or an acting individual. In my terms, it's the equivalent of the substitute teacher. They may be a wonderful educator, but they get no respect. Everyone knows they're not there for the long term. People understand that they're not going to take on the tough issues or think about long-term solutions, and their decisions aren't going to be viewed as final. It's a real problem. Great people may be operating in those positions, but they're operating with 2 hands tied behind their back. It's no way to do things. At SSA, it's not just the commissioner. You're talking about 3 Senate-confirmed positions, and all 3 don't have a permanent person in place. You only have 1 nominee for the IG. That's a big problem. And then it cascades through the rest of the organization, where you have acting individuals in critical spots. So you have an acting deputy commissioner for operations, an acting deputy CIO, acting chief information security officer, and 3 of the 10 regional commissioners are also acting. Having acting leadership at the top has consequences throughout the organization. Hard to recruit people, hard to make decisions for full-time folk if you don't know who the real boss is going to be. That's a big problem. These positions are critical to all kinds of issues that are fundamental to the operations of SSA, and we need to make sure we get folks in there. Couple of facts about SSA that are worth focusing on for a second. Note, only about 4.3% of the SSA population workforce itself is under the age of 30. There are 6 times as many people in the IT workforce over the age of 60 than under the age of 30. You're not going to get done the critical work you need to do without the right workforce, and you don't have it there right now. So what can you do about it? This committee hearing is fundamental, so kudos to you for doing it. 5 ideas for you. I'm going to run through them fast. Number 1, it's not just getting someone in place that is fundamental, but you need to define the qualities and competencies needed for these roles that are open. Not good enough just to have someone in the seat. You need to make sure you've got someone who's got large management capabilities, can deal with the IT transformation that needs to take place. So identify those capabilities. Number 2, you need a job, that's the job description. Number 2, you need a performance plan. You need to make sure that they're actually being held accountable for specific things that need to be changed, and that needs to be transparent in real time so you understand whether they're doing the job and it's being done well. Number 3, use the data that you already have. The Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey is a powerful tool to tell you what's going on in these agencies. Not a good story at SSA. In 2012, it was number 6 in our best places to work rankings. Today, it's number 12 out of 18. That's a big drop. And if you look at the numbers themselves, there's some big issues. So on the question, for example, employees are encouraged to find better ways of doing things. At SSA, that's only 55% of the employees would say yes. That number is 18 points lower than our private sector benchmark. On the questions about are my talents being used well in the workplace, at SSA, again, that's 54%. That's 23% below a private sector benchmark. Fundamentally, though, you have an incredibly mission-driven workforce. So one area where their numbers are better than the private sector to the question, I'm willing to put in the extra effort to get my job done, you got 95.6% of the employees there saying that. They care about what they're doing. So now number 4 recommendation, consider tying the 6-year term to confirmation. Chairman noted that you're 5 years into a term. You do need a long tenure if you're going to get real work done and to do real transformation. And average tenure of an ordinary political appointee is 18 months to 2 years. That's one of the big problems for government. You got short-term leaders not aligned to the long-term needs of the organizations they run. 6-year term makes sense, but it makes sense only if it's real. If the person walking in has that full tenure, that's not what you have right now. And then you all have responsibility for more than the Social Security Administration. Please do this for the other agencies you're looking out for as well, because these same issues play out across the board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your testimony. We'll now turn to questions. As is customary for each round of questions, I will limit my time to 5 minutes and will ask my colleagues to also limit their time to 5 minutes. Mr. Kurta, yesterday, GAO confirmed what we all know. Social Security has been led by an acting commissioner for too long. What does it mean for an agency to be in violation of the Vacancies Reform Act?
Chairman Johnson, after the expiration of an official's allowed period of acting duty, the position is to remain vacant, and the non-delegable functions and duties of that position can only be performed by the head of the agency. To determine any impact, the agency would need to determine if any agencies that were taken by the acting commissioner after November 17th were non-delegable. In other words, could only be performed by the commissioner and nobody else. Any such action taken in violation of the act would have no force or effect and may not be ratified. Where violations have occurred in the Vacancies Act, it is the agency's responsibility to determine if any actions that were taken were non-delegable.
Thank you. Ms. Brannon, right now we're more than 5 years into the current 6-year commissioner's term. Knowing how long the Senate can take sometimes, if the president wanted to, could he nominate someone for the next term right now? And if not, why not?
The president could probably nominate someone for the next term. I think the Social Security Act, however, would prohibit, while there's still a vacancy in the office, I don't think someone could be appointed to that next term. Because the statute says that if a commissioner is appointed to the term of office after the commencement of that term, they may only serve for the remainder of that term. So long as there's a vacancy in the office, anyone who's appointed in the middle of a term can only serve for the remainder of a term.
So do we need to change that rule?
You could.
Thank you very much. Mr. Larson, I recognize you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses as well. I'm struck by a number of things, and I'll start with what Mr. Richmond had to say, and that's that by putting somebody in place is not going to solve, at least listening to all your testimonies, the problems that Social Security faces, long and short term. And Mr. Steyer, I especially like the example where you say we put somebody in for a short-term period to solve what are long-term problems for the country. Ms. Curda, you elaborated a lot on the technology aspects of this and said while on one hand that Social Security was addressing some of these issues, that they failed to follow through. That failure, is that based, as Mr. Richmond said, on lack of resources? Or is it technical ability? Is it because of what Mr. Steyer said, because the age of people is different and people with different capabilities aren't in those positions? Could you elaborate more on what GAO's findings were?
Certainly. I think the main issue with SSA's information technology is the size of the legacy IT operations that they have. They have systems that are running on software that uses a programming language that was most prevalent in the 50s and the 60s called
Wonderful.
COBOL. And they don't even...
Is it radioactive?
Yeah, I don't think they even teach it anymore. And so they are dependent on people...
So we're operating in the Social Security takes great pride in saying that its loss ratio is like 99%, which makes it one of the most effective, and the envy of the private sector insurance world would love to have that kind of loss ratio, and yet we see these glaring failures, you know, wait times, 600 days, as the chairman was saying to me, just totally unacceptable, 4-hour waits. Are they still on hold waiting for your call, Max? This is just, we cannot, as a institution, as government, you know, sworn to serve our constituents, allow this to go forward. What improvements could be made, and does it need the funding of these resources to overhaul a system that's been in place since the 50s?
We would recommend that we have recommended that they modernize their legacy system.
Well, when you recommend that, what does that mean? Do you suggest a specific remedy? Do you specific technology?
Well, let me just break it down for you. They spend currently $1.8 billion on information technology, and that is split into two major categories. The $1.1 billion is spent on operations and maintenance of those legacy systems, and only $0.7 billion is spent on development, which is essentially where you can create new and better systems. So sort of a focus on shifting more resources into the development side. They have 66 total systems. They have 6 major systems.
So let's take it as a given, based on what you're saying, and we can gather this from the written information as well, that we're woefully negligent on the technology side. But as Mr. Richmond pointed out, still for that human contact, and as Mr. Steyer pointed out, with the age of the agency, people there, what will we have to do there as well? Mr. Richmond, where we, you know, it seems to me like we have a...
I think the resources are inadequate across the board. I don't have a specific number. I did point out the addition we've written to the appropriators, asking for an addition of about $460 million for fiscal 18, and about that much for fiscal 19. You know, I mentioned to Mr. Larson before the hearing started that I was in Florida for a town hall meeting with one of your colleagues last Friday night. And a woman asked a question. She started by saying she waited for 4 hours to talk to somebody in a Social Security office. And then she said, don't you people in Washington understand what it means to have to wait 4 hours or to wait 600, 700 days to get a hearing? And she included me in those people in Washington when she said that. And she did want to understand why members of Congress don't appreciate all of that. And I didn't really have a good answer for her.
Well, I know my time is up, Mr. Chairman, but I would like in a second round to come back to Mr. Steyer. I thank you for your 5 recommendations because I would like to explore those further. And Ms. Brandon, we both commented when you were speaking that, wow, did Congress really write that? Based on how you were explaining it, we could barely follow it. But one thing we would like to see is what your recommendation would be to improve it. This happens frequently at hearings. I don't know if my other colleagues feel the same way, but oftentimes we get people who tell us very specifically what they think is wrong, but then don't offer a suggestion as to how we should improve it or how we could make it better. So in the next round. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, thank you for the questions, and thank you for your responses. Mr. Holding, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Steyer, I'm going to follow up a little bit my friend Mr. Larson's line of questioning. This subcommittee has talked a lot about the critical need for SSA to update its seriously aging IT systems. What is it called? Cobalt from the 1950s. Even SSA has stated that their previous strategy of incremental modernization isn't going to get the job done, and there's a critical need to undertake a large, multi-year approach to updating its aging IT. In 2016, GAO testified before this subcommittee about SSA struggles with the strategic planning and long-term planning when it comes to IT. So, Mr. Steyer, maybe you could speak to the importance of having a confirmed commissioner in place to implement and execute a long-term, multi-year task like IT modernization, which seems to be a big issue not only for SSA, but a lot of other government agencies as well.
Yep, absolutely, and I think you put your finger on something vital there. It is cross-government. Federal government spends $80 to $90 billion in IT. The overall numbers are even worse cross-government than in SSA. It's about 70% on operations and maintenance. And the workforce challenges are also spread across government. You do have to have long-term leadership to not only to be able to see a project like that through, but also to make the commitment to prioritize it. Because it's so hard and so difficult, no one in their right mind is going to do it if they're going to be around just for the first year of paying and not see any benefit later on down the road. I would say that GAO is one of the best run organizations in government, not in stamps substantially because you got a 15-year term. You know, whether it's Dave Walker or Gene Dodaro, you know, they know that when they make the investments in their people, their systems, whatever, they're going to see that payoff for themselves. So again, you have a better alignment. Here's what I would argue that you need to do in addition to the resource question here. One, it's not just the amount of money, it's actually having multi-year money and certainty. One of the big challenges, you know, you think about a business that you're running, you have capital budgets. You have the ability to actually think longer term about the kinds of investments that you're going to make, and agencies don't have that. When you talk about these IT system, large investments, very, very hard to actually see them through when you have very short-term money. Number two, you need executives that actually understand technology. It's not just your IT workforce. You need executives themselves that understand how to drive these transformation projects. When the IRS had its major transformation the last go-around, for the first time, and maybe ever, and certainly in a long time, they didn't hire a tax expert. They hired a technology guy, Charles Rosati, and he was able to change the IRS in a pretty dramatic way. Different model. You had someone who understood the large-scale transformation that needed to take place, the technology around the IRS. Problem being that once you do it, 15, 20 years ago, it's not good enough. One of the challenges for government is we're catching up to the past. And you see these big, long projects that fundamentally aren't agile, that are not actually using the techniques that the best-in-class companies do because they're thinking about a 10-year project or whatever it might be rather than the more iterative, we can make mistakes, but we're going to get better and better. And that kind of development is fundamental, especially as the shelf life of technology is getting shorter and shorter. It's not good enough to build these long-term systems, expect them to live 30 to 40 years. They ain't going to do that. You have to look at more commercial, best practice, off-the-shelf stuff. You need a very different level of technology. You need different kinds of people, like what you'll see in the United States Digital Service, which I think is a good resource. But I think this is a great topic for you. You know, absolutely, it begins with leaders. If you don't have leaders, none of this other stuff is going to matter, but it doesn't end with leaders. You need to have the technology transformation to change the capability of the organization.
Thank you, Mr. Steyer. Now, I'm going to shift gears real quickly to Ms. Bannon, and if this is beyond your brief, you can get back to me in writing. I understand there's a lawsuit pending at the Supreme Court related to the appointment of a handful of SEC administrative law judges. And in response to the case, the SEC commissioners have recently ratified the appointment of all the ALJs to ensure their legitimacy, but the Supreme Court's ruling in the case could have serious consequences for all of SSA ALJs appointed by an acting commissioner. If you're able, could you walk me through these possible legal ramifications?
So the concern in that case is that these ALJs are officers of the United States within the meaning of the Appointments Clause of the Constitution. And if they are officers of the United States, then they have to be appointed in accordance with the constitutional procedures. The ratification was an attempt to appoint them in accordance with those procedures. The situation, I think, is analogous to the ALJs in Social Security. There are possible differences, and I think that was recognized by the courts that are considering this issue. I'd be happy to, there are a lot of complex issues involved in this, so I would be happy to explore that more at a later date.
Right, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, you're back.
Thank you. Mr. Pasquale, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. All of you are experts really in this area, did a terrific job. Very interested in your testimony, Mr. Steyer, because I think it's really a path for us. You're demanding more of us, and we should have oversight that bites. Right now, it's kind of vague, foggy, and that's how a lot of people like it. So thank you for holding this meeting, Mr. Chairman. Ensuring we have leadership in this critical area of Social Security and the Social Security Administration. There's no way an organization can effectively do its job without someone at the top planning for the long term. We heard from Mr. Rickman the long-standing problems at the administration, Social Security Administration, and that simply is not going to be remedied by appointing and confirming a new commissioner. We don't even have nominees yet, let alone a person to take the job. That's unacceptable. We need to provide the Social Security Administration with more resources to reduce wait times for paying benefits, approving benefit applications, and responding to inquiries from the public. And you can go down many lists, whether you're talking about transportation, educational technology, regardless of what you're talking about, trade negotiations. We don't have people to do the job. We just don't. And you can't ignore that issue. Because this is a pattern, a plague on both parties. No one is individually responsible. No party is individually responsible for this. We go along to get along here. Across the country, there has been a closure of 64 field offices. Disability hearings backlog with an average of 605 days. I'm just thinking of all the folks that I have come through my office for help for this. 605 days. In New Jersey, wait times in Newark average 668 days. That's almost 2 years. I mean, how long do we have to live? That's an interesting question. In Jersey City, 703 days. The South Jersey Hearing Office has one of the worst processing times in the nation, 739 days. And we talk about our responsibility to our veterans. What about our responsibility to our seniors? They served the country. They gave it the best. They made it the greatest country in the world. You know, this amounts to nearly 25,000 cases waiting to be heard. Sounds like the VA. These types of numbers are outrageous and they're unacceptable, and we cannot argue them away. They didn't happen overnight. It's not a Republican problem. It's not a Democratic problem. It's our problem. Lack of oversight. They happen when congressional Republicans choose many times to starve the agency. Fewer resources mean fewer staff and tools, which means more people are left out in the cold waiting for help. Adjusted for inflation, the Social Security Administration, the budget has declined 11% in the last 7 years. During this same period, the number of Americans receiving Social Security benefits has climbed by 15%, 8 million people. We're going backwards. Mr. Rickman, let me ask you this question. Can you talk about the enormous service delivery challenges facing Social Security in future years as baby boomers reach retirement age? What impact is that going to have?
I think the problems that you outlined will be aggravated. There'll be more people brought into the system. If the trajectory of funding continues, there will be less money to help more people. So I think it's pretty obvious that, as you said, we're going the wrong direction.
And what that does is increase the lack of credibility in government. And it seems to me that that may be an objective of some people who get elected to come to this House. Just one more question, Mr. Chairman. Will these service delivery challenges be helped or hurt if the Social Security Agency receives the additional $560 million that Ranking Member Neal and Larson and Davis have requested? Is that going to help it, hurt it? What is it going to do?
Absolutely help it. We sent a letter to the House endorsing the legislation you just talked about, and we think it would make an enormous difference. We're trying to catch up now, and that's what this additional funding would allow.
I want to thank the honesty of all the panel members and thank the chairman again for bringing this subject to the American people. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schweikert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And forgive me if I take a slightly one-off. I absolutely agree with everything that's been said here about, the time for revolution in technology, the mechanisms. And I think the actual number is what, 10,300 baby boomers functionally retiring a day now since 2008. So if 10,300 is 3.7 million a year. But my fear is, and some of this is going to be to you, Mr. Richmond, I actually think we're whistling also by the crisis. If I sit here and do math, Medicare, Social Security will be adding $130 billion a year in additional entitlement spending. Okay, think of that. Every 5 years, that's the value of the entire Defense Department. So every 10 years, just the increased spending is to defense departments. Since 2008, Social Security, Medicare account for 72% of all the inflation-adjusted growth in spending here in government. Today, someone retiring in Medicare, in inflation-adjusted dollars, so like-for-like dollars, put in $140,000 and takes out $420,000. My little girl, when she's a teenager, there will be only 2 workers, so one couple supporting a single retiree. Yeah, we have problems in their IT system, problems in their budget, problems in the outreach and the quality of customer service, and we have a crisis that becomes one of the greatest systemic threats ever to this nation, and it's not decades away. It's in a dozen years. And so, Mr. Richmond, first, is there something wrong in anything I just said math-wise?
Well, you know,
is there anything wrong I just said math-wise?
What's wrong with what you said is that these programs, Social Security and a good part of Medicare, is paid for by the payroll tax. And that is money that's dedicated to these programs.
Okay, and your point is?
My point is, you know, we're not a group that has our heads buried in the sand. We realize if nothing happens in 2034, there will not be enough money to pay every beneficiary every penny that they are supposed to be paid. We're not saying don't do anything, ignore that. First of all, it's not a crisis. Crisis was 1983 when we were looking at almost 20 years. We were looking at 6 months. But if you can let me answer, the answer to it is not to start talking about cutting benefits, cutting the COLA, raising the retirement age. The answer is looking at ways, reasonable ways, to bring more revenue into the program.
Okay, so your solution is the additional tax revenues.
My answer is to make the payroll tax fair.
Let me finish. Over the next 30 years, and now this is not inflation-adjusted dollars, just Medicare adds $40 trillion in debt. Just Social Security adds $19 trillion. I think the greatest systemic threat to seniors is almost what you just said, the unwillingness to actually either get leadership at this agency, leadership from all of us, leadership from the advocacy groups to actually do math. Because, Mr. Chairman, math always wins.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Ms. Bennett, you had talked about the SSA being in violation of the Vacancies Act. If the President were to nominate a commissioner, would the SSA still continue to be in violation?
So the Vacancies Act says that someone can serve either for a 300 term of days starting from the vacancy, that's gone, or can serve during the pendency of a nomination. So Ms. Berryhill would likely be serving in compliance with the Vacancies Act if she meets the criteria for a senior official who is permissibly directed by the President to serve, and if a nomination other than her is submitted to the Senate.
So, okay, but that's, I want to make sure we were doing that. Now, the other question I want to ask, because I think we're all on the same topic and the same concern, and that is the viability of what it is that we've put out for folks, and the fact that it's funded by people in the workforce, because it is that the wage taxes that fund this. I want to ask you something, because sometimes it comes down to how we spend the dollars we get in. In 2008, the previous administration decided to develop an in-house software program to replace the commercial off-the-shelf disability determination system. The goal was to save money, all right, and improve efficiency. However, to date, we spent hundreds of millions of dollars, missed all the deadlines, and still don't have the project complete. SSA has spent well over $420 million on this project, even though a commercial off-the-shelf program has existed for decades at a cheaper cost. And unfortunately, under an interim director, this effort for an in-house program has continued. Are any of the witnesses familiar with the issue, and do you think of not having a confirmed SSA commissioner has been part of the problem? Mr. Steyer, I think you're spot on with this. So if we had somebody there, and I think the thing that we lack, and I think we all talk about this, Social Security can continue on this type of a program because it's not in the private sector. And what I'm wondering about, is it the process that's the problem?
So I think that unfortunately there's and I'm answering the question.
No, it's okay because we're all concerned about the same things.
I think there are multiple contributors to the challenge here, and
but my question, if you're in the private sector and you have a problem that you have to solve, and the reason you have to solve it because if you don't solve it, it means you go out of business.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's no deadlines.
Yeah.
For any of this. There's no possibility of this ever going away, and we keep saying what we have to do is find more revenue somewhere. And so I look at this and we say we spent $420 million on a project, even though there was there was already a commercial off-the-shelf piece available, but we decided not to do that. And you can only do that if it's not your own money. If it's your own money and you have to stay open, you do what's in the best interest of the people you serve and the money that you have to work with. So I've always wondered, is it a lack of money? Or is the fact that we don't spend money the right way?
So my view is you're going to have, again, a combination of multiple things here. It actually is more complicated. So sometimes the model for folks in thinking about how you run a government agency is just run it like a business. The answer is you cannot run the government like a business. You can
I understand that. We're $20 trillion in the red. There's no business that would still be open.
Well, there you go. But you can apply business principles. It's not sufficient simply to look at.
Okay, can I ask you, because you just said we could apply business principles.
Yes.
There was no CEO serving on any private entity right now that would be looking at this and say, I still deserve to be in charge. My concern is as we go through this, we've been waiting 5 years, right, for a commissioner? So it just didn't start now, but this process of getting through, and I got to tell you, if somebody from the private sector who is looking to come on and somehow help his country or her country by serving in government and then looking at the process they have to go through and be on the sidelines waiting to be approved, you'd have to be a damn fool to sit there waiting for that to happen. I just think we lose so much enthusiasm, so much passion, the fact that we leave people sit on the sideline and say, someday you'll get a chance to get on the field, but not yet.
Yes, and your proposition is absolutely correct for the political appointees. It's also true for the career folks as well.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of great talent that actually would like to serve the country. The process of hiring is overly complex.
That's my
point. Takes too long. You're entirely right. There is opportunity to bring great talent in, and the process itself is dissuading really good people from pursuing those options. And that's something that ought to be changed, and it's something that, frankly, again, that you have some opportunity to change. So when we think about the rules that govern the way our government operates, were largely created in a different era.
Yeah.
You have a legacy government that hasn't kept up with the world.
One of the things I've noticed since I've been here is, when you ask somebody, so why do we do it this way? They said, well, that's the way we've always done it. And I said, well, that's not a good process going forward. I find your testimony really good, and I know there are so many really patriotic people that serve in the government. It's got to be very frustrating to be watching this and say, I know it could be better if we could just get this process changed and make it something that makes sense. So I appreciate you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having this. I think we all want the same thing for all our people because we know who funds it.
Yep.
It's the people who are working and the people who pay them to work.
Yep.
That's a wage tax. So thanks for being here.
Right.
Thanks all. I really appreciate everything you're all doing.
Mr. Larson, you have a comment?
Well, Mr. Rice is, I believe, is.
All right. Mr. Rice, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm struck by the continued testimony we hear about various government agencies and their inability to modernize their IT. And I think that, certainly it's not going to solve all the problems, but it's going to go a long way towards solving a lot of these problems. I think it would definitely affect the 600-day wait time. I think it would probably cut down on the need for some of the employees and probably cut down on some of the needs for funding. So, Mr. Steer, I want to ask you, this today is about Social Security, and I guess Mrs. Curta, you said that they have how many systems running on legacy program?
They have a total of 66 systems.
66 systems.
Yes.
That seems like an awful lot. Do they really need 66 systems?
That I don't know, but someone had referred to the modernization of their case processing system, and that is a case of where you've got 54 disparate systems operating across the states that are used to process the disability claims. And the point of the modernization is to bring all those together.
So right now they have 54 different systems across 50 states.
Yes.
So some states have more than one system, and they can't necessarily talk to each other.
Probably not, yeah.
Do you know how many of those are written in these, are these legacy programs that have been around for 50 years?
I'm sorry, could you repeat
Do you
that?
know how many of those are these legacy programs that have been around for 50 years?
No, not.
Okay. You know, we met with the IRS a month ago, and they said that they had 300 points of failure, which means that over 300, it's like 320, which means that they have programs that they're running, 300 different systems, where they have just one guy who knows how to program it because it's so old. And if he dies or he retires, they're in trouble.
Yeah, there's the same problem at the Social Security Administration. They've had to rehire people who've retired who have the knowledge to do the programming of the COBOL systems.
You know, Mr. Larson likes to say that Social Security is a really good insurance policy. It's the most effective insurance policy you can buy. So just think of an insurance company, say MetLife or Aetna or any, do you think they're all running these legacy programs, any of them?
Probably not.
Probably not. Mr. Stewart, why is it that, you know, it's not just Social Security, it's not just the IRS, CMS, they testified in front of us last week about the opioid crisis, and I asked them, can they track the prescriptions? You know, we're paying for it. I mean, the federal government is the biggest drug dealer in the world. I mean, we're the source of the money that buys these opium prescriptions. Medicare and Medicaid. And I asked them if they could track those prescriptions and tell how many pills people are buying. She said we could in 40 states. But we have 50 states. Air traffic control. We're working on a system that's developed just after World War II. They're handing slips of paper back and forth. Why is this a systemic problem in government? Why is it that, you know, you look at every private agency and they've all they don't even know how to spell COBOL. That's long forgotten. Why is this a systemic problem in government?
3 answers. Number one, when you look at the top of the house, the leadership, you got those short-term leaders that are not aligned to the long-term needs of the organizations they run. That is the fundamental here. Yes. Very hard to get, you know, you get the exception. You'll get someone who comes in who's willing to make all the hard calls, take all the lumps, even knowing that they're not going to get any of the benefit on their watch. But that's number one. Number two is you have a real challenge around real-time performance information in government. In a private sector organization, you have clarity of outcome because you have a financial metric you're trying to achieve. Government is trying to seek public goods.
In other words, it's not their money.
I'm sorry?
It's not their money.
No, it's a different. It's a different point. It's not that it's not their money. It's that their performance goals are not about money. Their performance goals are about a public good. So if you're working at the State Department, it's about national security. The measurement in government in the public sector is harder. So you're asking, I'm trying to give you what I think are the root causes. And the third one is, I'm going to say this, and I'm hoping this will be taken in August, it's you. And it's Congress. And the reality is Congress has a fiduciary responsibility for the executive branch in 4 different ways. Number one is the budget. You're not giving budgets. You talk to me about any private sector executive out there. They could not run their organization. They had everything else that they needed with the kind of runway you give them. And it's not the amount of money, it's the fact that they don't have a budget. You have 21 CRs, or rather 21, it's like 21 CRs in the last whatever, how many years. It's nuts, can't be. Number two, and this is on the Senate, is that they have a role to play, obviously, in the confirmation process. Number three, it's your oversight. This is the rare kind of hearing that you have here. You need more of them. You need to be holding the leadership in the executive branch accountable. And number four, you need to look at the underlying authorization laws because, again, you have legacy organizations, you have legacy understanding of what the mission and goals are, and that work hasn't been done by this body. So with all due respect, those are my 3 reasons.
I'm glad you said that. I'm making it my goal in the immediate future to try to drag some of these agencies into the 21st century.
If I'd love to be of any assistance that I possibly can be on that goal.
Thank you, sir.
Joe Crowley.
Mr. Crowley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson. Let me yield a minute to my colleague from Connecticut.
I just wanted to follow up on what Mr. Steyer had to say, and I think the line of questioning here is great. I think there's some great common ground here that we can find, but I want to go back to another point, and I do believe that this is an insurance issue, and this is an actuary issue. Mr. Steyer, have any of your insurance premiums gone up since 1983?
This sounds like it's going to be an ugly line of questioning, but I don't think that sounds like a rhetorical question to me.
It is a rhetorical question because they have. But to your 3 points, one, and I think you also mentioned lack of a capital budget, but with this kind of oversight and with some of the people that we have here on this committee and some of their knowledge, I think with a capital budget, getting those kind of improvements that CEOs of a private sector company would do would come automatically. But when Mr. Richmond was asked before, I mean, everyone in America understands, whether it's your homeowners, your automobile, your health, or whatever, it has risen actuarially. That hasn't happened since 1983, so it's no wonder, without any kind of investment on our part, that we find ourselves in this situation. And yet, what is Social Security but the full faith and credit of the United States government? I make this point because I think this is easily addressed. But if we just address, and this is a point my colleagues always, if we just address the spending side, but we don't address the technology and capital improvement side, and do that in terms of the revenue, then I think that we have a balancing out in a way that we could phase this in and work through this in a way where all Americans would benefit, and we could take Social Security off the list of concerns that we have here and let Americans all take a deep breath, including millennials and Gen X's, knowing that we solved the future. I'm sorry, Joe, go ahead.
It leaves me 3 minutes. That's a long minute. Thank you.
I was a former chairman. You know how that is, Joe.
You're killing me here. Let me thank you for this hearing today. And Social Security is what keeps millions of Americans from abject poverty. It ensures that if you're injured on the job and you can't return to work, you have the affordability of disability insurance. And it really affects the neediest and most vulnerable amongst us. It's something that they've earned. It comes out of their paycheck each and every month. And that's why this is what makes what has been done to the administrative part of the program so unconscionable, in my opinion. I agree with the chairman that we need a Social Security commissioner, permanent. I appreciate the bipartisan work on this. And I really don't understand why the president hasn't even nominated anyone to be the Social Security commissioner. But the main problem is that the administrative funding for SSA has been seriously hurt since my Republican colleagues have taken office. As a result, we now have a wait time in Queens and the Bronx of over 700 days. That's 700 days wait time. That's nearly 2 years. And Americans are quite literally dying while they are waiting for the benefits to be approved. Thousands of Americans. And again, we're talking about benefits that they have earned. I have a Daily News article I'd like to enter into the record, Mr. Chairman, that talks about the ridiculous wait times, including for a man who has spinal cord injuries, and he waits for his disability. It shows why we need to make sure that people actually get the benefits that they have earned. But the article also shows how this is a man-made crisis. There is a simple fix to the problem, which is to provide funds to help process benefits and adjudications. But the Congress has kept SSA administrative budget basically flat. And when you add in inflation, we are talking about massive cuts. It is really too much. Is it really too much to ask for proper funding so people can get through on the 1-800 number? Is it really too much to ask to hire more staff so people can get their benefits on time? It shouldn't be. So let's make it happen. I know over 100 of my colleagues have joined myself and my good friend from Connecticut, Mr. Larson, in sending a letter to the administration urging a fix for this problem. And if this Congress can afford to cut trillions in taxes for the wealthiest, can't we also ensure that people get their Social Security benefits that they have earned and they deserved? Mr. Richmond, I have just a quick question for you. Would additional funding allow Social Security to hire judges, attorneys, decision writers, and clerks needed to reduce the delays in disability appeals hearings? And would additional funds help Social Security decrease wait times in places like my district in Queens and the Bronx?
The answer is yes. Before you arrived at the hearing, I commented that the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare has endorsed increasing the funding by $465 million this year and about the same next year. And it's not only the points that you raised, but there are people that actually develop and write the opinions. There aren't enough of them. That's part of the delay. And waiting 700 days is not unusual. And yeah, I just wonder how many members of Congress would willing to wait 700 days to have a decision that important made, or to wait 4 hours to talk to someone in a Social Security office. 4 hours, that's what a lady told me that I met with in Florida last Friday. And there is, and you know this, I may not make any friends like you didn't, but there's a Social Security office in the building next door, and there are 2 people there that serve everybody. And it's for, anybody can use it, but hardly anybody knows about it. And you don't have to wait 4 hours to talk to someone. You can talk to someone immediately. I've been in that room. I worked for a congressman here. I worked for Sid Yates years ago, and I know where that office is. You don't wait at all. So it's important. I think it's important for members of Congress to understand the reality of having to deal with these kinds of waits, to having to sell your home because you're waiting so long to get a benefit that you deserve. So the short answer was yes. The long answer I just gave you.
Mr. Chairman, let me once again thank you for holding this hearing in a bipartisan spirit as well. I think there are things we can do to reduce this wait time and to help our constituents. This is not a Republican nor Democratic cause. It just so happens you all are in the majority now, and the responsibility here is more incumbent upon you all. But we want to help, and Democrats and Republicans want to work together on this issue to address the waiting period. It's just unconscionable, as I mentioned earlier. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. You know, as we've heard today, Social Security's been without a commissioner for 5 years. We've also heard that Social Security is facing critical challenges that aren't going to get any better without real leadership. Social Security is just too important to continue to leave on autopilot, and that's why today I once again ask the President to please nominate a commissioner without delay. Mr. President, we need a nominee, and we need one now. America deserves nothing less. Thank you to our witnesses out there. We appreciate all of you. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you to our members for being here. With that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
Great testimony.
It's fairly short. It's good. Sometimes they go on and it's hard to sit there. Because you can't quite relax. You can't relax. You can't kind of get out and stretch. You know, you usually do.